will be equally successful this time.
I take a point from the woman in the front here.
I find it very difficult to take from Michael Ancram the fact that this is common sense when you're wheeling out Margaret Thatcher, let's face it. She's a bit of a senile old has-been.
Absolutely agree with you.
Do you want to answer that?
But again, I mean, what we were hearing about Anne Widdecombe, now we're hearing about Margaret Thatcher. Do you know what Anne Widdecombe actually proposed, among other things, in this?
They didn't say they were talking about Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, but
a senile old has-been. Not Anne Widdecombe was a thermos flask, according to that. It's Margaret Thatcher that she's attacking.
Margaret Thatcher and Anne Widdecombe both talk a lot of sense, and they talk a lot of sense about things that matter to people.
Okay, the gentleman in the front here, you, sir?
Yes, well, I'd like to say to Robin Cook, you came in, the Labour Party came in 97, the general election, proclaiming that they were going to listen to the people of Britain in various issues, and also your own party. The fact is, the Prime Minister has a problem with his own party. Do you know, I actually feel sorry for the traditional Labour supporters, because they're treated like members of an automobile society. You call it, and your Prime Minister calls that democracy. I don't call it democracy, I call it hypocrisy, and that goes throughout the country as well. You're not listening at all. At the end of the day, the policy that the Labour Party has is the next we want to get into power in the next election at any cost.
Let's take the issues that are of concern to the heartland Labour voter. On unemployment, we have slashed unemployment. 650,000 people more in work than at the last general election. We have halved youth unemployment. We've brought in a minimum wage that provided a real increase to 2 million people for the first time. We are investing more in health hospitals and in schools than at any time in the history of the NHS. And we have also provided for real increases in pensions, the biggest increase in child benefits.
The figures are massaged. You've increased spending. All governments have increased spending. You claim you've increased it substantially, and I don't believe
government and you provided the investment we have in the health.
The country does not believe that is the case, because clearly there's problems with the waiting list. We've got waiting lists for different waiting lists to get on a damn waiting list. So I mean, don't give us that. For God's sake.
Let me get to the back there. There are three people with their hands up, but I don't know what's fair. I'll take the man in the middle. Yeah, you.
The original question was about the Back to Basics programme. I wonder if Robin Cook supports Back to Basics, family values, and the importance of marriage, that sort of thing.
I'm happy to say I'm a happily married man, David, and that's all I'll say in response to that question.
Okay. I want to keep on this. We're still on your conference, so let me bring in another question from Mark Ramsbottom, who's a student union general manager.
Yes. Does the panel think that all our problems have come from mainland Europe?
This is back to Mrs. Thatcher, yes?
No, obviously not. But certain problems that she was referring to, like 2 world wars, sprung out of the arguments within Europe, and I don't think any of us deny that. We also lived through a period of Cold War in which Europe was divided, and problems were coming out of a divided Europe. Equally, and I can say this as someone who is partially Italian, Europe and the combination of the nations of Europe have produced some of the great successes of this century as well. Europe is a mixed bag.
You want to come in on this?
Good.
What a
Well,
it's how he says them. It's how he tells them, really. I mean,
I feel very strongly about this issue. I work in a business in a world that is moving very, very fast and would have got absolutely nowhere if it hadn't shown humility for models around it. And one of the things that I hope that we've learned in the internet world in the UK is that you have to keep track and learn from people around you. Things change so fast that something I believe today could be completely wrong next week. And I find it staggering, the arrogance with which someone can stand up and say that mainland Europe has caused us all these problems when I'm living in a world where I get stimulation, excitement, and new business models are created daily.
All the solutions, she said, have come from English-speaking nations. Because the internet is mostly English-speaking, isn't it?
Well, that in itself, I mean, no firstly, and secondly, that's to do with 100 different technology and penetration and PC and hardware things.
Let's just pursue this a bit further. Ray Duffy, who's a financial controller. Ray Duffy.
The Tory party...
Yes, where are you? Sorry, I've lost you. At the back there, yes.
The Tory party seems to be moving further and further to the right, especially with the policies on Europe. Do the panel think this is a good thing, firstly for the Tories, and secondly for the country as a whole?
Janet Street Porter.
Well, I find the fact that both parties could only talk about the future in terms of the past profoundly depressing. So, having been in Bournemouth for Tony Blair's speech, I found it depressing that he could only talk about the future by knocking conservatism both on the right and the left, and that we all have to sign up to some happy clappy club, you know, to go forward. And I thought that he didn't acknowledge the fact that Britain is a tribal society of individuals, and we all value our individuality perhaps more than he does, and our right to choose. And when it came to William Hague's speech, I was also depressed that a large section of that was harking back to the past and going over great moments in the past. And I think that to go forward, we've got to embrace Europe and be positive. And we've got... What's amazed me about the government so far is that they haven't been bolder, and given the majority that they have been so cautious, and that surprises me. So I'm not cynical but disappointed, and I think that we have to be optimistic and bolder in the future.
Okay. Robin Cook.
Well, I think I'll have to send Janet the collected edition of my recent speeches on Europe, but we are exactly embracing Europe as our future and as our destiny.
They define a change in attitude on your part.
They define the position which we are taking in this government.
Cautious, cautious.
But Dave, we've just been told not to go back in the past. Yes, of course, if you go back in the past, it is perfectly true. I was one of those who was sceptical about entering the European Union. I now recognise that if we want to have a future as a prosperous trading nation, the European Union is where we've got to be. And it's not just a question of being there grudgingly, putting up with it. You've got to be there, making a go of it, and showing that you wish to make a success of it. Now, I am deeply alarmed by the position into which the Conservative Party has backed itself over Europe. They're quite explicitly saying that they're going to reduce Europe to chaos if they don't get their way. Now, what that will mean is that Britain will become as unpopular in Europe as Europe is within the Tory party. That is bad news for all the millions of people out there working in manufacturing industry to whom Europe is the largest single export market. It is bad news also for us in the rest of the world, because our clout in the rest of the world is much greater when we work with Europe than if we work alone.
On the specific point that William Hague made, that the Tory policy, if elected, would be that unless there's flexibility introduced, there will be no more treaties in Europe. Would that, in your view, bring Europe to a full stop? What would happen?
Well, it would certainly bring enlargement. It would bring enlargement to a full stop straight away, because the next treaty, it would, Michael, the next treaty is indeed to prepare the way for enlargement. Without the next agreement on the constitutional changes within Europe to the institutions, there will be no enlargement. That will not only be deeply unpopular within the countries of the European Union, but throughout all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And can I just make one point here, David? You know, during the recent Kosovo crisis, we were able to exercise a position of leadership, and we were able to bridge the gap between the United States and the countries of Europe in NATO. We could not have done that if we had reduced Britain to a marginal power within Europe. And if you go down the path that is being outlined by William Hague, not only will you lose your influence in Europe, you will lose your influence around the world, because Washington and the other capitals will not take you so seriously if you cannot deliver.
Can I just ask you, just move on, but can I just ask you one point? Are you saying that your experience as Foreign Secretary has led you over the past 6 months to become more confident, enthusiastic about Britain joining the euro than you were 6 months ago? Has it been an actual change, intellectual change for you?
Over the last 2 years, I have seen, first of all, how we can achieve a position of respect for Britain in Europe, and we've done that. Secondly, how you can actually deliver better within Europe if you're taking a positive approach. Take the case of the beef ban. The Conservatives, when they were in office, adopted exactly the strategy they're talking about this week. Vetoed everything in a beef war which they lost and gave up. We now have an agreement that we will be allowed to export beef to Europe. Curiously, at the present time, the obstacle is France, which decided it's going to be flexible and it's going to opt out. That is exactly what the Tories were asking this week for everybody to the right to do.
Can I make a point about expansion? Because I think this is quite important. I remember the days at the Tory Party conference when lots of right-wing politicians, newly emerging from former communist countries, were paraded. And the claim was that the Cold War was ended by the strength and resolution, in particular, of Mrs. Thatcher. It would serve these countries, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, very little good whatsoever if their ability to join the European Union, which is not only for the economic advantages it would bring, but it would allow them to buttress and to stabilise the democratic institutions which they've created, if these countries were denied entry because of a bout of petulance on the part of William Hague.
Michael Ancram.
First of all, dealing with Robin's case, I knew he was going to bring up beef, because we always hear beef being brought up. The actual practical...
Because you made us a mess of it.
The actual practical reality, I think you'll find out that the amount of beef that has been exported since the world-proclaimed lifting of the ban in July would fill a London taxi. It hasn't happened because you haven't gone out and tried to sell British beef.
Okay, but come to the point. Come to the point your leader was making today about bringing Europe to a halt. Let's leave beef from it. Come to the point about bringing Europe to a halt if a Tory government doesn't get its own way.
What William said today was that in future, and this refers to future directives, not to the treaty as it stands at the moment, we will wish to see flexibility so that you can adopt those future directives which suit your country but not those which don't. The examples of that we had in the past were the opt-outs that John Major obtained for us at Maastricht in terms of the social chapter and in terms of the single currency.